Hello and welcome to Crisis Management for RAs. In this presentation, we're going to go over what a crisis is and what your role will be in different forms of crises. The goal is to go through procedure for what you might do in specific incidences, with the knowledge that this is only to get familiar. Obviously, when you're in that moment, there will be resources for you to help you understand what you need to be doing. And then when we come back in August, we're going to work on skills. So some of those things might be talking to victims or to affected parties, crowd control, multitasking, those sorts of things, so that we can manage crises effectively. But today we'll be going through procedures. And that tagline there, you should be familiar with common procedures, but you're not expected to memorize the information in this session. So we want to compare and contrast an emergency and a crisis. They are subtly different, and the way that we think about them will be different, and your role in a crisis versus an emergency will be different. And then outlining steps a resident assistant will take, including evacuation, threats of violence, and medical emergencies. And then lastly, we'll be using safety first alerts so that you can find those and hopefully add to that, sign up for those, and then so that you can help other students find those. Starting with what is a crisis is an ongoing condition, event, or situation that poses a risk to person, damage to property, or disruption to a university activity. Another way to think of a crisis is an ongoing emergency. So a lot of times in an emergency, you'll have professional staff and first responders taking the lead. But because a crisis is ongoing, that's when we're going to be asking you as a resident assistant to help out with things like crowd control, getting people connected to the resources that they need, letting EMTs into the building, that sort of thing. And those three criteria, risk to a person, damage to property, or disruption to university activity, are important to think about because you'll sometimes have people saying, oh, this is a crisis, and you can understand that, yes, it's important and it's urgent, but maybe not a crisis to where we need to be putting all hands on deck. The first category, and probably the most common that we'll talk about, is the evacuation crises. So this is, most commonly we're talking about fire evacuations. There's a broad category of incidents with potential harm to buildings and the people and property inside. So first, we'll talk about in the event of a fire. We will have a fire drill once every month throughout the academic year, and those are just the drills. There is also the chance that we'll have an actual fire emergency. In both cases, our response should be very similar. So if you see smoke or an active fire, trigger an evacuation at a pull station. Those are the red boxes with the levers on them that say pull, and there's always one located near any exit. If you can see a small fire and are comfortable, you can use an extinguisher or a fire blanket to try and put it out. And we'll be going through fire extinguisher and fire blanket training hopefully in the fall when you're here in August. But that's only if you see a small fire. So keeping in mind the size of the fire, you might be able to put it out, but the priority is making sure that people are safe. And so we want to be triggering an evacuation in that case too. And then always make sure that you're connecting with somebody else. So usually that's a professional staff member on call. That could be public safety and police services, and then the professional staff on call, but making sure that somebody else knows. What we tell students to do, and that you should do too in case of an emergency or a fire evacuation, is take your keys, your ID, appropriate clothing for the weather. So that might be a coat or shoes. Closing your window, open the draperies, turning on the light, and then closing your door. And that helps us to isolate the fire and also understand who's in the building. When you exit the building, go to your designated house meeting location and line up in room number order standing next to your roommate. So that's what we tell our students to do. Those fire evacuation locations are linked on the Canvas page right below this presentation. And then please do not re-enter until instructed to. Even if the alarm goes off, know that that doesn't mean that the building is ready to be re-entered. Make sure that you're waiting for a verbal or other indication from professional staff or emergency responders. And then your role as an RA, make sure that you have an up-to-date house roster. Your residence education coordinator should be getting those to you regularly so that you always have one ready to go. And then know where your safety vest, your badge, and your fire arrestor and flashlight are at all times, so that you can reach those in case of an emergency or an evacuation. Follow the evacuation for your route for your area and meet your residents there. If an RA is gone for that night or not present at that time, we're asking that you do your best to help out and account for their residents. So that could be asking somebody that you recognize from their hall government or asking somebody that you recognize in general, saying, hey, can you help me make sure everybody's here or somewhat accounted for? That doesn't mean that we're going to be able to find everybody, but to the best of our ability, we're understanding everybody who should be out of the building is out of the building. That way we can get a hold of first responders and let them know, hey, we don't know where this person is. We think they're in the building or they might be in the building, so that they can prioritize them with their rescue. And then after a fire evacuation, you'll need to turn in your fire rosters to your residence education coordinator every time, so that we have a record of that when we get audited for safety protocol. In the event of a tornado, these are not common, but notification of a tornado warning will come from the Department of Public Safety and Police Services, and then you are instructed not to leave the building. So this is an evacuation because we're leaving the area that we're commonly populating, but we're not leaving the building. There are designated storm evacuation shelters in each residence hall, and those are also outlined or linked below this presentation in Canvas. In general, we're going to be looking for shelter on lower floors of buildings without outside windows or glass. Interior hallways, bathrooms, or basements are always good. If you are outside in the event of a tornado, get away from any vehicles and find the lowest ground possible. If you're on campus and you hear this, you're more than likely able to get into a building with a storm shelter, but if you're off campus somewhere, this is also good information to have. And then your role as an RA, because we're not leaving the building, is just to help lead people to the proper evacuation location and as best as possible account for the residents in your house. In the event of a gas leak, this is another emergency that might come up. Knowing that natural gas has an added sulfur indicator that will smell similar to rotten eggs can help you spot a natural gas emergency. Usually, if you start to smell it, there is some time to confirm a smell before danger is imminent, but that's something that you don't really want to play around with. So we're having you connect with Public Safety and Police Services as soon as possible, and avoiding electricity or things that might cause sparks, because if there is a natural gas leak, that is flammable and that can cause danger to other people. We want to get you to a safe location away from the building. When it's cold, that can be another building around campus. So if Hillside were evacuating, we might head over to McNair. And we're saying do not pull a fire alarm because that can cause sparks. And your role is to notify Public Safety and Police Services and always follow their directions, and then giving verbal evacuation notices to help people get to a safe location. We're asking to help give verbal evacuation notices because we will not be using the fire alarm in those situations. For medical emergencies, it's pretty common for Michigan Tech students to get injured, sometimes playing broomball or sometimes just trying to get down the McNair Hill. So that happens, but most of the time, every time we're gonna have access to emergency medical services on campus to be able to check them out. So make sure that you're calling public safety and duty phone to note the location, what happened, and the condition of the person. If you are comfortable and trained, you can administer first aid. That is outside of the scope of your role as a resident assistant, but might be inside of your role if you are first aid trained or EMS certified. And then we're asking that you help with crowd control. If it's a non-emergency, so the person is injured but does not need to be taken in an ambulance to the hospital, determine what is a proper course of action. You are never to drive a resident to the hospital. You're never to drive a resident, pretty much, period. But particularly the hospital, there's a great amount of liability that falls on you and the institution in those situations that were not covered. So there are options for sure. You can ask if they have a friend or another resident with a car who can take them, or if somebody else can drive their car. Public safety can sometimes help with transport, so you can call dispatch or if there are any officers on scene. And then there's Houghton Transit in the city. There's, I think, one, maybe two Lyft drivers in town now. And then there's a taxi. If you're having trouble finding a way to get there, please don't default to just driving them yourself. Please contact your pro staff and figure out a plan. Lastly, threats of violence. And with this one, we want to be really clear that as an RA, your first responsibility is to keep yourself safe. If you find yourself in this situation, your only responsibility is to yourself. So this is a big contrast between a fire evacuation where you're responsible for helping keep track of other people. In this situation, you're only responsible for yourself and your own safety. We do not by any means expect you to be a hero or to stop an action or to put yourself in greater harm to help other people. So this is totally on you, and we do offer extra training on this. In general, we want you to get to a safe location, to be communicative with pro staff to let them know that there is an issue, and then to be communicative with public safety and police services. You'll want to stay calm and quiet, and then understand that the police might be harsh with you. This is not something that we go extensively into with our required training, but there is additional training available. If you're interested, there's a video linked below this Canvas presentation, and then we have more opportunities for training through public safety and police services. In general, the Public Safety and Police Services recommends the 3 outs: lock out, get out, or take out if a hostile person is actively causing deadly harm or imminent threat. I don't want to glance over this because it can be pretty important in the moment, but it's also something that we hope never happens, and also something that we know can be particularly triggering for some people. So we do have more information available, but in general, we want you to know you're not expected to be a hero. And kind of starting to wrap up here, safety first alerts. Anything that goes on campus we're required to notify people about. So if that's a snow day like we had last year, or a building closure or a weather emergency, those will go out through safety first alerts, and you can opt into phone calls, voice calls, emails, and SMS text messages. So we recommend that you go through and set that up for yourself. That's really good to know as an RA, for information to disperse to your residents and also just in general. And then we also encourage you to encourage your residents to set it up themselves. And that's also linked here below the presentation and can be located through My Michigan Tech. So that's about everything that we wanted to cover for procedures. There is a quiz following this, and then we hope to cover the skills in August when we meet with you all in training. Thank you.